So Ruth Bader Ginsburg died of complications from cancer. She was 87 years old. She had been fighting cancer since, I believe, the 1990s. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was pancreatic. And the numbers on pancreatic cancer are out of this world. Like, if you get it, it's basically a death sentence. And she somehow survived from like the late 90s all the way until 2020, having had it. So it's a minor miracle she made it this far. She's honestly got to be in like the top 1% of survival rate for people that have pancreatic cancer. So there are colossal political ramifications as a result of her death. I'm sure all of you know this. What are the potential scenarios? We have a Republican president. We have a Republican Senate. We have a Democratic House. But we also have an election coming up in like 40 days or so. So that is really, really close to the election. Now, needless to say, when it came to Merrick Garland, that was Obama's final pick to the Supreme Court to replace Antonin Scalia, who passed away. Republicans blocked even a hearing on Merrick Garland for 9 months. 9 months. We're only talking about like 40 days until the election now, this time. So, what's going to happen? Well, Vice News actually put together this really good piece, which lays out for you the various scenarios that could happen moving forward. Let's take a look and then we'll discuss.
First step, President Trump gets to nominate a new justice. But you're saying, hang on, didn't Barack Obama nominate a Supreme Court justice 10 months before the 2016 election? Wasn't his name Merrick Garland? And didn't Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell refuse to give Garland even a hearing, all because he said it was too close to the presidential election and the people should decide? Yes, yes, and yes.
If there's a Republican president in 2016 and a vacancy occurs in the last year of the first term, you can say, Lindsey Graham said, let's let the next president, whoever it might be, make that nomination.
And here's something else very important to remember. Whatever they say, Mitch McConnell and Senator Lindsey Graham do not care that you think they're hypocrites. McConnell's made filling the federal courts with conservative judges his life's work with President Trump. They've set records. Remember, a lot of conservatives never liked this transactional, crude, unconservative president. This is the thing that keeps them all together. This is the GOP glue right now. This is the thing that brings the evangelicals to the yard. So be mad all you want. McConnell is going to try to do this. And all eyes right now are on Amy Coney Barrett, an appeals court judge that Trump appointed to the 7th Circuit based in Chicago. She's very conservative. She's only 48, and Trump's base love her. But will McConnell be able to deliver? It may seem like he's the Senate dictator, but really he isn't. He has just a 53-47 majority, so he can only afford to lose 3 Republican senators as he attempts one of the biggest power plays in modern political history. And they're not all down with this. Here's what could happen. If Trump nominates a new justice in the next few days, option 1, McConnell rushes a confirmation before November 3rd. It has some advantages. President Trump's base would love it. It would, believe it or not, distract from the fact that 200,000 Americans are dead from COVID-19, and most Americans hold Trump responsible. Don't forget, there's an election coming up for 21 Republican senators, too, and some could use the help. Martha McSally, down by 7 points in Arizona. Joni Ernst is in a dead heat in Iowa, and a fired-up conservative base could help them. But for Republicans in blue states, there's a big downside. What about Susan Collins in Maine? She's way behind, largely because she voted to confirm Justice Brett Kavanaugh. If her race becomes a referendum on a right-wing justice, she's done. And Cory Gardner, falling way behind in blue Colorado. Does he want any part of this right now? So McConnell could get the justice, but lose the Senate. Worth it? Option 2. McConnell waits until after the election while Trump is still in power and schedules the confirmation for the period between the election and New Year's called the lame duck. Election pressure's off. Much easier for his members to take hard votes. Though at least one GOP senator said she wouldn't vote to seat a new justice in 2020. And if Arizona Republican Martha McSally loses her special election, she's out right away. And McConnell's 3-senator cushion becomes 2. This might explain why on Friday night, McConnell told Republican senators, don't say anything and, quote, keep your powder dry. McConnell also has to think about someones we haven't mentioned yet. The Democrats. Oh yeah, them. Say Dems win the election. They're going to take control of the Senate in January. And Democrats are already talking about how to make sure that McConnell's hypocrisy comes with consequences. They could say, do this now and we'll eliminate the filibuster, cut Republicans out of everything in 2020. We'll vote to expand the Supreme Court to 11 seats or 13 seats and then fill them with our nominees. So what if McConnell gets the justice but loses the power to do anything in the Senate? And what about the presidential election itself? When Trump nominates a new justice, something surprising could happen. Instead of COVID-19 or the economy or Trump's incompetence, this election could become all about, say, abortion rights. The right wants a court that's bent on restricting access to abortion, but the majority of Americans don't. The chance to overturn Roe v. Wade could galvanize a lot of Republican voters, though it would also drive a lot of Democrats and independents and women to the polls, or to their mailboxes, as the case may be. And on the topic of a functioning democracy, Ginsburg's death raises questions about how a court with a vacancy would rule if, say, it's called on to decide vote-by-mail cases in swing states. What this comes down to is calculation, risk, the election, and control of all three branches of the government in a polarized and pandemic-rattled America. Who wins the Senate and the presidency with the people's votes has everything to do with how this goes. And remember, it's not about fairness. It's about power.
That was actually a great breakdown, so let's run through it here. He says that the hypocrisy thing takes a back seat to ideological goals and power. And that's the truth, man. You know, there's this instinct from liberals to just highlight what Mitch McConnell said previously or highlight what Lindsey Graham said previously. And there is some value in that. You can expose that, you know, their views on procedural stuff are always just convenient for whatever serves their interests. But anything beyond that, like, it's not as sick of a burn as you think, because what they do is they value higher their ideological goals and they value higher exercising power. The procedural stuff takes a back seat to it. And what you see from Democrats is quite the opposite. They actually abide by a lot of the procedural stuff that Republicans would abandon willy-nilly for, an ideological goal. And it reminds me of this tweet that went viral. Somebody said something along the lines of, like, Democrats and Republicans are playing a board game. Republicans say, screw this, and light the house on fire. And as the house is burning down, Democrats are still sitting there plotting their next move in the board game. And that really is an apt analogy. That is exactly right. Democrats are trying to color within the lines and abide by, the limitations of the institutions and follow the procedures and precedent. But Republicans are like, that I don't care about any of that stuff, even though I said, like, Chuck Grassley last year was like, no, I don't think, in the final year we should approve a Supreme Court justice. Lindsey Graham, 2018, same thing. You just saw the clip. There are others, and now they're just like, oh, no, yeah, but see, what happened was the sun was in my eyes, and then this thing happened, and then that thing happened, and then what happened was last time when the makeup of the Senate was different, and now we have a situation where Republicans have the Senate and the presidency, and that's why it's different. Therefore, if we approve a justice within the last 40 days before an election, it's totally acceptable, and it's not hypocrisy from, what they did with Merrick Garland. So they'll find ways to these nonsense rationalizations to wiggle out of it, because ultimately, at the end of the day, they don't care, because to them, the bigger goal is flexing. It's the power. It's, the ideological end game of getting as many conservatives on that court as possible. And here's the scary thing, guys. This is the thing that should really, give you a moment of pause. Even if let's say we get a genuine left-wing president. I'm not talking about Biden. I'm talking about like an actual social democracy-loving lefty. An FDR-style president. And you also have a supermajority of Democrats in the Senate, and let's say a supermajority in the House. If we have an overwhelmingly conservative court, then they could just strike down anything that a left-wing government does. So let's say we do a Green New Deal. They could say, oh, the way that you crafted this is unconstitutional, therefore we have to throw the whole thing out. This is what a conservative court could do. Let's say we get Medicare for all. A conservative Supreme Court could say, oh, this violates, some principles laid out in the founding of our country in the Constitution, and we're going to strike this down. So, they have the power of judicial review, and they could determine what's constitutional and what's not constitutional. And if you have highly ideological right-wingers, ardent doctrinaire right-wingers on the court, they could basically take anything that a left-wing government does and say, wrong, this is unconstitutional, we're not going to allow it to go forward. And to some extent, this already happened with Obamacare, where aspects of it were slapped down. The whole thing wasn't, thank God, but aspects of it were slapped down. And, there was nothing we could do. There's nothing we could do about that. You could try to amend the Constitution, but that's almost mission impossible. Or you could, in the long run, try to change the makeup of the court. That's, the more practical goal. I know there are some on the left who want to undermine Marbury versus Madison and the whole notion of judicial review, but honestly, I think that's mission impossible as well, and you're in la-la land, and that ship has sailed. We have judicial review. It's not going anywhere. So it's just a matter of you have to play the game now and play it better than the Republicans, and you'd have to get more left-leaning people on the court. So, I mean, that's the only takeaway that is reasonable, I think. But then that gets into the conversation about, okay, well, if they appoint this justice, if they fill this seat, well, then yeah, you have to have the conversation about packing the court. FDR did it. You have to have the conversation about, okay, are we really going to be these procedural humpers and have that as the cornerstone of our ideology of our institutions, good sir? Or are we going to say, no, actually the policy goals are what matters the most, and getting positive change is what matters the most, and by any means necessary that are nonviolent, we're going to do that. I think that's what true believers would do. I think that if you really believed in a philosophy or ideology or a viewpoint, yeah, you're going to do whatever you can to get that implemented, without being violent. And so if Republicans have abandoned any semblance of procedure, process, our institutions, the rules, then it's asymmetrical warfare. If they abandon it, and then you're sitting there, not playing the same game. I would love it if the Republicans didn't play that game, and we could all abide by, because I do think institutions are important and procedures are important. But if they've totally abandoned it, and they're playing the game of by any means necessary, what do you want us to do? So, now, the scenarios are interesting. He says McConnell can only lose 3 Republican senators in this fight. And he's already lost 2. There are already 2 who are legit in saying, I'm not going to fill that seat before the election. So that's really important. He can only afford to lose 1 more. And all eyes are probably on Mitt Romney because he's one that could be movable. But I don't know about that, man, because what have I told you guys on this show for the longest time? What they don't like about Trump is the mean tweets and how he doesn't know how to play the game and he has no decorum and civility. That's what they don't like about him. His judge choices, they love the guy for his judge choices. Are you kidding me? They agree completely with everybody who Trump would pick to be on the court. For sure. There's no stronger point of agreement than this when it comes to standard right-wingers, standard Republicans, and Trump. So he says they could rush the confirmation before November 3rd, but what that guarantees is you're hurting Republicans in blue states. So, in other words, you could get the justice, but you're going to lose the Senate. Is it worth it? That's the question. Or you could push it through in the lame duck. And in that case, you could get the justice, but you lose the power to do anything else. And, they float that Democrats might do something like, okay, there's going to be consequences. We'll eliminate the filibuster and we'll pack the court. Now, will Democrats actually play that kind of hardball? I tend to doubt it. But, I mean, this really is sort of like an existential battle because if the Democrats, if the Republicans fill that seat, man, everything just got so much more bleak. Everything was already bleak, but it just got so much more bleak in the long run because then on issues of healthcare, on issues of immigration, even on issues of abortion, with an ardently conservative court, they're going to do a lot of damage. Unions, like there's a bunch of cases going before the Supreme Court on all these vital issues, and we could be entering a devastating era if they fill the seat. One of the things I've talked about on this show previously was this era of the Supreme Court called the Lochner era. And man, it was a terrifying time, because what happened was the Supreme Court effectively ruled that employer and employee had what's called a right to contract. And that means the government cannot step in as an independent third party and try to regulate a private contract. So in other words, the government can't say, hey, we have environmental regulations that you have to abide by. Or, hey, child labor is a bad thing. Or, hey, you should pay a minimum wage to make sure people aren't working full-time and living in poverty. There was an era where the Supreme Court said it's illegal for the government to do basic regulation. And if an employer and employee agree to something, piss off. So now, why is that crazy? It's crazy because the employer has all the leverage over the employee, and they can basically force them to do things that they don't want to do. And so they could force them to work overtime and not make more pay, all these terrible things. And the Supreme Court ruled that there was a right to contract for private businesses. And that opened up this extreme, free market fundamentalism era in the U.S., which was devastating. And that was in place for a generation, and we had to overturn it eventually. And we did have an era that was more left-leaning on the court, which revisited a lot of this stuff. But I don't want to enter that kind of a world again, man. I don't want to have a court that is like 1,000,000% of the time biased in favor of the business owners and the corporations and the billionaires, and they screw workers and they screw unions and they mess up healthcare. And even on social issues, they're going to be primitive and, flip on stuff like abortion. I mean, it would just be a total nightmare. So what's going to happen? Guys, I don't know. I don't know, because we are really, really close to the election. And I'm not saying that as in as like a strategic point of, oh, we're so close to the election, so you better fight. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying objectively, we are so close to the election that they literally just might not have enough time to get this thing done, because I think the average it takes is like 70 days to get something like this done between the pick and the hearing and the confirmation. It takes like 70 days, and we only have like 40 days until the election. So it might be close enough to the election where even if they wanted to, it would be very difficult. But I don't know. I really, really don't know. And the only prediction I'm somewhat confident in making is that this does help the Democrats electorally. It does. Because, this is a huge loss, and it's everybody on the left that kind of acknowledges that, whether it's your run-of-the-mill, #resistance, normie Democrat, or it's your, firebrand lefty. Like, they all across the board, we all realize, oh, okay, this is really, really serious. And so we've already been beaten down sufficiently. But then when you take another step back in a situation like that, it does tend to fire everybody up. And I'll get to a story in a little bit. Democratic fundraising numbers are monstrous after what happened here. So I do think it helps the Democrats. And beyond that, a lot of the issues that are going to be highlighted in regards to the Supreme Court, they're issues where the Democrats have such an overwhelming advantage when you look at the polls that if people feel like reproductive rights are under threat, again, that's going to fire people up. So I do think that this helps the Democrats electorally, but I don't know how the fight is going to unfold, what's going to end up happening, what the Democrats will do in response if they try to jam it through. There's just too many question marks, but it does add to the chaos of the moment, and there's quite a bit of chaos. And honestly, that's the last thing we needed. I think the election is going to be a mess. The red mirage might happen where it looks like Trump wins on election night. This is what the data analysts say. It looks like Trump wins on election night because Republicans are more likely to vote in person on election day. But then when all the mail-in votes are counted after a week, it could be that Biden wins comfortably. And that's a scenario that'll lead to such utter chaos because 40 or 50% of the country will literally just be like, I think the election was stolen. So what do you do in a situation like that? Now add in another thing which sets us back, and it does sort of feel like the fabric of the country is slowly coming apart. But we have to wait and see what happens, and just hope that they can't get a justice through, and the Democrats learn to fight in a way that works and sort of abandon this how dare you sir procedural humping and just take the position of like, we're all about our policy goals. But the problem is they're usually not like that because they don't really have the same policy goals as you and me. They are comfortable corporatists. So who knows? The saving grace is usually on issues like this, like the Supreme Court, or on like social issues. The Democrats do tend to be a little more aggressive on that stuff because, corporate power isn't as crucial a part of this. You know what I mean? Like on Wall Street issues, on war issues, yeah, Democrats and Republicans oftentimes agree. They agree way too much because they're both bought by the same people. But yeah, when it comes to something like the Supreme Court, or when it comes to some social issues like abortion, you do see Democrats are at least more strident in believing what they believe and pushing what they push on those issues. So I don't know. I don't know how this will unfold, but everything's a mess, and no matter what happens, I don't think it'll be pretty.